Welcome everyone. This is ModX Network Voices. I'm Ryan Smith, and I am joined by Ivan Rupnik. Ivan, you like to say hello?
Hello, I'm the non-Ryan on this call today.
That's right. And that's funny because we are joined by Ryan Colker, who is from the ICC. Ryan will introduce himself, and we're going to discuss a little bit about codes as it relates to offsite construction. Ryan, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'm Ryan Colker, I'm Vice President of Innovation at the International Code Council, which means I get to look at fun and interesting things that are happening within the industry and seeing how ICC can help move things forward and certainly lead in areas where we can lead. And so offsite construction is certainly one of those areas where we look to be a leader.
That's great. So today we've invited Ryan to give a little bit of a overview of what ICC has been working on with regards to offsite construction. And he's going to be sharing his screen and talking a little bit about the different initiatives. We'll do this in a very discussion-based format. So Ryan, go right ahead. There's a share screen button at the bottom there. There we go.
Yeah, thanks. Definitely appreciate the opportunity. I think one of the important things to get off right off the bat is, most folks know the International Code Council for its development of model building codes, which is certainly, a key and important activity that the Code Council does. But there are a whole host of other areas of sort of building safety, building resilience, community resilience, where the Code Council is engaged. And a lot of our offsite construction work actually cuts across all of those different areas. So in addition to codes and standards, we have training activities, personnel certification, product evaluation and testing, accreditation, third-party plan review, third-party inspections. And so all of those pieces really come together to fill out our portfolio of offsite construction activities. I will direct folks to the ICC's offsite construction page, which is just iccsafe.org/offsite, where we've really tried to collect, all of those various different activities and give folks sort of a one-stop shop to really understand, how ICC is supporting the offsite construction industry. But I think the main thing is really the recognition that offsite construction and the kinds of challenges that offsite construction is really meant to address fit squarely within the mission of the Code Council. So, building quality, building safety, addressing the workforce, sustainability issues, affordability issues, all are within, the purview of what the Code Council is really looking to address. And so that's really sort of where we see offsite construction as a, valuable contribution to the industry. And so, we're really trying to help facilitate moving the industry forward to address, some of these key challenges. I can sort of dive in a little bit into some of the specific areas that we are working. As I mentioned, the Code Council develops model codes across, a variety of different building aspects. International Building Code, International Residential Code, the Energy Efficiency Code, all of those, apply to offsite construction just the same as it does to on-site construction. And so, that's, I think, where some of the challenge has been, within the offsite construction space is that, the codes were initially written and sort of continue to be written in a way that primarily focus on your site-built construction, just because that's sort of the, I guess you could say, standard way of, doing things and where sort of most folks are, familiar with construction activities. And so, we've really had to make an effort to make sure that, offsite construction fits within that general sort of code landscape and it still meets, the requirements that are set forth within code. And so there are a few things that we've already done to help support that. ICC Guideline 5 is on the use of shipping containers as building materials. I know that's been a very emerging market emerging area of interest. We had gotten a lot of questions from code officials on, someone wants to bring shipping containers into my community. What do I do with this stuff? And so the guideline was really, the ability to sort of pull together best practices and give some guidance to code officials on, how to address that. Since that guideline has actually been developed, some of the recommendations have actually been incorporated into the International Building Code. And so that's sort of how we see the progression of new information coming out, moving into codes and standards. The second document there, which actually wasn't intended for offsite construction, it was actually initially intended for sort of big box retailers, folks that are doing sort of the same types of buildings over and over again, and then getting sort of a compliance check on the overall aspects of the building itself, and then being able to go to a different jurisdiction and say, I've gotten approval for sort of the core elements of my building. I know you have local amendments to your code. Let's look at those instead of, every single time sort of going through and rehashing, the entire plan review process, for instance. So that's ICC Guideline 1 on replicable buildings. Some activities that are currently underway within the Code Council is development of 2 new standards around offsite construction. So, as I mentioned, the codes are particularly written to support construction in general, and then, many folks have had sort of trouble or not really sort of understanding how offsite construction particularly fits within the code environment. And so that's really where we're working on standards development. So one standard will focus on planning, design, fabrication, and assembly, and sort of how all of those processes come together to support code compliant buildings. And then the other area that we've particularly seen challenges on is the inspection and regulatory compliance piece. So we have a whole variety of different state programs on how they handle offsite construction. Some places leave offsite construction to the local code official, and each of those state programs is different. Most local code officials don't really sort of understand where that intersection is between a state program and local responsibility, and so the Standard 1205 is really intended to address sort of that disconnect. Hopefully provide some consistency across state programs, and really, provide that level of efficiency in the regulatory space that can then be captured by offsite construction. And so that's sort of the technical area of work that ICC has underway relative to offsite construction. I can certainly talk about some of the activities within our subsidiaries as well. And sort of how how they support offsite construction. So I'm happy to do that as well if you'd like.
Maybe just a little bit about these particular ones that are on the screen here, the ICC MBI and ICC. Just for everyone's knowledge, MBI meaning the Modular Building Institute, right? Which is is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So these will be developed as joint standards.
Yeah, and it's an interesting, Modular Building Institute being the trade association, ICC being the International Code Council. Wondering what this process looks like. Is it a committee that comes together, and how did that happen, and what decisions are they making along the way to lead to this standard? If you could lead us through that consensus process.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're both being developed under an ANSI process, which is the American National Standards Institute. So ultimately, if we follow that process correctly, these would be designated national standards. And so there wouldn't be other standards that sort of fill, this particular topical need. And so that ANSI process, relies on a few, important aspects. So certainly due process, consensus, opportunities for public comment, sort of all of those pieces are an important part of the ANSI process. And so we put out a call for members sort of late last year for development of the two standards. Those applications that came in were approved by the ICC Board of Directors for participation in the standards development. Importantly, the committees have to be balanced, so making sure that we have representation from the regulator community, so code officials, state program representatives, from manufacturers, from users, from designers, and so we have a very diverse committee of folks. They come together frequently to sort of hash out, what are the requirements within the standard, what sort of content are we looking for, what needs to be covered. We also have working groups, so those are folks that are not necessarily on the standards committee, but anyone who's interested in offsite construction and the potential outcomes of the standards can actually participate in the working groups, provide feedback, and work through that process. So that's sort of where we are right now. I believe there's about 6 different working groups working on sort of different aspects of the standards development process. Once the working groups and the committee reach a place where they feel like they've got a good sort of initial crack at the standards, we actually put them out for public comment. And so then anyone who's interested can review the proposed content, provide recommendations, make recommended edits, address sort of anything that they see missing or wrong within the standards, and then the standards development committee actually goes through and reviews all of those comments and identifies whether they need to be addressed, how to address them. And so we'll probably actually go through a couple rounds of public comments to be able to, make sure that we get to a standard that, really addresses the needs of the industry and has the input from all of those various different groups. So, I mean, if folks are interested in participating, you can get on to one of the working groups. So that's sort of the current way to be involved. And then certainly keep a lookout for the ability to provide public comments and public review, which will be another area for a broader spectrum of the industry to provide feedback.
This seems like a really major step for the industry. Do you have a sense of when when it might be in effect, or like what your target goal is for when we might see it in action?
Yeah, so the intent is actually to have it complete for inclusion within the 2024 International Building Code. So that means about, I believe it's about September of 2021. We need to basically have it ready to go for inclusion in the next edition of the building codes.
And since the industry, I mean, the offsite industry is going through, has been going through like a serious evolution. There's been a lot of changes that are happening. So it's a totally necessary step to move the industry forward, but the industry is a moving target, even more than site construction. Is that something that, how is there a way that you're thinking about balancing how flexible it is and how it addresses the way we do things today, and we might even changing the way we do things in a year or two?
Yeah, so there's certainly that flexibility there. We will see an updated, an update schedule for the standards development. So that'll be an opportunity for folks to, address any sort of, new technologies or new procedures. I think also there is the potential to do sort of add-on standards. So right now there's sort of, generalized off-site construction. We've had some interest in potentially doing a sort of an overlay standard on energy efficiency and mechanical systems. And so there could be sort of sub topical areas where we could concentrate on. Maybe it's a new sort of emerging area that needs, additional focus.
So Ryan, you used to be with the National Institute of Building Sciences, and you were instrumental in some of the beginnings of the Offsite Construction Council that I helped develop when you were there. You are a Juris Doctorate, so you have a law background, and now you're with ICC. So you've been with the topic for quite some time now, but you're not you're not a practitioner in the building industry per se, or come out of that tradition. It's an interesting perspective that you have. And I guess I would just ask, in light of where you see this going and how it is evolving, what is the importance of standards to the construction industry in ensuring its progress? And in particular, in offsite construction, why was it important to have a standard at all? Wouldn't the market just sort itself? What is the importance of a standard, would you say?
Yeah, so I definitely appreciate that. As you mentioned, my background is environmental policy and law, with a very sort of interdisciplinary focus of really trying to understand, where are all the intersection points? How does everything come together? And I think that really sort of captures the challenge within the building industry as a whole. We have so many sort of different pieces of activities, a lot of small businesses that cover sort of one individual piece of a building project, and sort of they can focus on their little sort of widget or whatever piece of the puzzle that they have. When you start to talk about offsite construction, it's really about bringing all of those pieces together, and you're really only going to capture the efficiencies that you're looking for, or addressing some of those industry challenges that you're looking for, if you're able to sort of see that vision of how all of those pieces fit together. And so the standards are really about sort of creating a common place for folks to come together and recognize how they fit within that bigger picture. How do they play well with others? And ultimately, sort of at the end of the day, being able to say, we've worked together on this offsite construction project to produce this module or this panel or whatever it is, but have sort of a common goal, a common place to work, and sort of the rules of the sandbox. So I think that's really where standards come in to really help support that collaborative and interdisciplinary effort.
And to be clear, when you talk standards, in particular in these, in the first document you were discussing, that's going to be coming out, you're not talking about a product standard. So we're not talking about this is how you manufacture a module. You're talking about procedures, as I'm understanding them. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and what kind of standards you're discussing?
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, it's really around sort of procedures and process rather than sort of your box must be X by X with these particular components in it. It's really about being able to understand sort of the process itself, roles and responsibilities, and then what are the intersections with content within the code itself. And so making sure that at the end of the day, what comes out of the process is compliant with the code.
And regarding some standards, Ivan and I have discussed on a previous ModX Concepts podcast that terminology is really important in this industry. How much do the standards discuss terminology, and in particular, as it relates to the regulatory agencies, does it get at this question of closed systems and the inspectors needing to see things in the factory and needing to see things on the job site? Is that something that's discussed at all?
Yeah, so there's actually one of the working groups is actually just definitions. And so they've gone through and sort of identified what are the common challenges, what are the definitions that are already within the International Building Code, for instance. Does that apply to offsite construction? Is there maybe a tweak that needs to be made to recognize sort of how offsite construction fits in? So they've developed sort of an initial list. But then as the standard development process continues, there are certainly other terms that pop up as well. And so they'll be continuing to work through that definitions process and hopefully be able to get some consistency. Where the standards sort of sit right now, I believe the committee has decided to focus primarily on closed construction as sort of the basis, recognizing that some states just look at volumetric modules, some states look at volumetric modules and panels, but really it's sort of about what can an inspector see on the ground as the structure is being erected versus, what they can see in the factory, and whose responsibility should it be to sort of check those various different items.
That's great. Very helpful. Ivan, yeah, any other questions you might have?
Yeah, maybe going back to the initial. This is great. It's very exciting stuff and a lot to unpack. But will there, through the process of working on your standard, do you feel like will there be any direct or indirect impact on the IRC or the IBC? Is there opportunities to? Because you mentioned earlier that in a way we understand that the IRC and the IBC, they oversee modular construction, panelized and volumetric, but they are inherently traditionally made around site construction. Do you see direct or indirect impacts beyond the standards that might start to impact the way IRC and IBC relates, nurtures, supports offsite construction?
Yeah, so one sort of quick example is the definitions piece. As the standards committee goes through the process of identifying definitions, they look to the IBC and the IRC for terms. And if those terms, don't meet the needs of the offsite construction industry, that could be, a code proposal into the next round to, sort of address that issue. We could also potentially see sort of, in future code iterations, folks pulling pieces out of the standards and incorporating them, directly into the code. So I think it does certainly would serve to influence, future editions.
And then is there, and then on the other hand, is there going to remain a kind of firewall between IBC, IRC, offsite, and then the world of HUD code construction?
Yeah. I think that's going to be, a continuing area of, sort of difference. I think, as the HUD code process, moves forward, I think hopefully, we'll see some of the elements, within the ICC MBI standards, incorporated into the HUD code, but they'll be, still sort of moving down separate tracks.
Interesting. Well, again, because this is a standard, like you were saying, and that's what made me think of it, is that this is a standard, so the IBC, IRC have a relationship with much more intimate, but in a way the HUD code, because relocatables and shipping containers, some of those creatures in the supply chain are as similar to HUD code home as they are to modular construction, which is a different system. And so it's just understanding. I also know that HUD itself is reevaluating, its own view towards its own program, manufactured housing, as well as its relationship to actual modular construction. So, and the Department of Energy is looking at it from their perspective. And so I guess there's a lot of conversations that seem to be going on at the same time, and they could all have an impact on moving the industry forward.
Yeah, it's certainly an exciting time to see everyone sort of starting to get the idea that, maybe there is something to this offsite construction.
Yeah, finally.
And to be clear, these standards that you're developing, in as much as they are a co-standard with MBI, we're not talking about three-dimensional volumetric modular proper. We're talking about offsite construction more broadly. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, good.
And I think, to MBI's credit, they've certainly recognized the rising tides float all boats kind of concept. So as folks get together and really understand sort of offsite construction generally, they can sort of identify which particular path works for them, and it may be modular, volumetric modular, it may be panelized. But sort of as everyone gets more familiar with offsite construction, what it provides, what it means, I think as an industry at large, we'll certainly benefit.
Well, I want to thank Ryan Colker for joining us, and Ivan Rupnik, as usual. We're really glad you were able to come on MODEX Network Voices today, and look forward to what comes out of this process. If you are interested, you can get a hold of Ryan and check out the website on the slides that we have on this video. Ryan, Ivan, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.